inside the recording studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. Welcome to another episode of our podcast. We're happy that you're here. Chris?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy people are listening. How you doing, Jody?
I'm alive and not unwell.
Yeah?
Good? Yeah.
Good? Better than most, not as good as some?
That's one way of putting it.
Yep. All right. Awesome. We're off the rails already.
Yes. It's because of one little setting that I forgot to tweak, and it's like, God, this is one of my favorites. All right, but I'm over it now. I'm a professional. Let's move on.
Let's rise above.
That's right.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. How's your week been?
So far, so good. It's filled with anticipation because in less than 24 hours, things will change.
Yeah.
That's how and that's all I'll say about it.
Okay. All right. Good. Let's get rid of the snow report. So how is the skiing going on in your part of the world?
Fuck all. I haven't gone skiing yet this season.
Oh, that sucks.
Yes, it does suck.
Long-time listeners will know that you're an avid skier. So
yeah, this season has been
how much
horrible for snow.
Yeah,
there's been no snow.
Yeah. First COVID, now this, no snow. Unbelievable.
It is. It's the first year I may actually go back to the God, why are we talking about this shit? Anyway, why did you get me started on this?
Already?
Real quickly, Vail Corp, which owns the rights to run the resort that I live at, has done something at least functional this year in that if you don't go skiing, you can get your money back on your season's pass. So I am within 1 week of calling them up and saying, give me my money back. I'm not going to go skiing this year because that's how bad the snow cover has been. Less than 1/3 of the mountain, or roughly 1/3 of the mountain, is open at this point. And most of the 2/3 that I would normally ski is not open. So it's like, why would I go skiing if I can't go skiing in the cool places that I like to go? So
right.
And this is coming from a diehard skier who loves skiing no matter what.
I know how you don't make those decisions lightly. So
no.
So that's the snow section of the podcast.
That's our nonsense section. We're already out of it. Good.
Yeah. Well, got to get it done initially and then just sprinkle it through the podcast. So what are we talking about today, Jody? What are we doing?
Phase cancellation.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if you're not watching the video part of the podcast, you'll notice there that Jody was squeezing his nose to kind of
approximate the concept of what a phase cancellation might sound like.
Phase cancellation.
So
yeah.
I apologize for your ears.
But phase is also one of those. I mean, it was a couple of episodes ago we talked about gain staging.
Yes.
And I think phase cancellation can be one of those sort of buzzwords or buzz phrases that you hear all the time, but might not know exactly what that means.
I'm not sure I've heard phase cancellation in a while in terms of just the phrase phase cancellation.
Yeah. Well, you hear, internet forums and this and that. And
oh, I see. Down where all the trolls hang out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
See, I don't hang out there.
Where the trolls live. Yeah, it's probably better for you
why
to
I
not
haven't
do
heard
that
for a while.
Yeah, it's probably. But so maybe we just start about if you don't know what phase cancellation is, it's essentially sound waves arriving at the microphone at a different time, and it causes the recorded medium to
sound hollow.
Sound
hollow or less thick, or cause weird sounds like this that kind of, you would think that, well, I'm approximating the concept by squeezing the shit out of my nose so that I'm sounding nasal, but phase cancellation can have a variety of different sounds, but the most common one is to make it sound kind of hollow.
Yeah. And we notice it two instances where I think about it immediately is, well, first of all, we should maybe, say that this only happens when you're using more than one microphone to capture an instrument.
Oh, I don't know if I can.
Well, let me clarify what I mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have, let's say, a 2 mic guitar cabinet, you got 2 microphones on said cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
If the sound reaches the microphones not at the same time, exactly at the same time, the waveforms will have a point where they null each other out to a lesser or a larger degree, and that causes phase cancellation. We hear that most clearly when we hear a loss of low end generally.
Sure.
But what I mean, when you have 2 microphones picking up, you could have something where you're recording an entire band in one room and that kind of thing. But generally we think about it as like at the recording stage where something is reaching a microphone and they're not, as it were, in phase, and you will get a little bit of a wonky sound. Sometimes that could be what you're looking for, right, as an effect, but generally it's not as pleasant.
Yes, that is true.
Does that make more sense?
Sort of, but I'm going to take it hopefully a step further in that.
Take it.
When you have, if you are familiar with what a sine wave looks like, which is kind of, I guess, considered to be a pure kind of sound, and you have sine waves that go up and sine waves that go down. So they cross this center axis of what is known as 0. And if you take 2 sine waves and you put them in exact opposite formations of themselves, so that one is going up at the same time one is going down, you're going to get what they call nulling out, which is what you just said. And what that ends up doing is if you do it perfectly, they'll erase themselves. And then you won't hear anything at all. When you get them both in perfect sync, they amplify themselves. So things get technically louder, right? Even though the 2 signals are one volume, the 2 together amplify the volume because they're moving in sync perfectly. Varying degrees between the exact opposite where they null out and the complete in sync where they amplify each other causes varying degrees of erasing themselves, right? That's essentially what you were saying. So they can be somewhat together and not fully erase themselves, and that will get that funky sound that you were talking about. Or they can be pretty close to the point of exact opposites where they're erasing most of themselves and such. So, but that doesn't always occur just because of miking a single instrument with more than one mic. It can be the result of 2 things competing in your mix as well.
Sure.
So you could have a kick drum that you have mic'd and you've spent your 2 days setting up all the mics on this mic, on this drum kit, so that you get the perfect in-phase drum sound, and the kick sounds gigantic and the drums all by themselves sound absolutely stunning. Then you add the bass in and you wonder, where the fuck did the kick go? and the answer to that is most likely the phase of your bass and the phase of your drum kick are not in sync to the point where they're canceling themselves out. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
so
I
it's not
agree.
just miking. It's also things that compete against each other in the mix. And if you're noticing things like that, it's good idea to check the phase.
Yeah, it's that's a very valid point, and I didn't think to bring that up. But I suppose we should sort of specify here that this can happen at varying points, right? But if we think first of the phase cancellation, what I primarily think about is during the recording phase or the capturing phase, where we want to make as much effort as we can to avoid that.
Sure. And that's a fantastic thing. Of course, you want to do that. Unless you're really going for that kind of combed out, missing portions of your sound in your initial recordings. the real big guys will often do it as an effect, as you've said. But the other thing that they'll do is oftentimes they don't want that. So they'll work on not getting it in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Right. But it is a good point to bring up, though, that you said that this obviously can happen during the mixing phase as well, when you have competing frequencies of different instrument, duking it out in whatever range they're at. So
yes,
we can usually fix that with possibly doing some either ducking or
inverting the phase,
well.
slightly shifting something on the timeline so that they're better in phase, even though that can have
the ultimate sort of like
results.
phase cancellation is obviously when we have something that completely nulls out.
Yes.
Right. As you described it with the sound waves and stuff. So, but there's varying degrees of that. And, I think, speaking of the miking thing that, I mentioned guitar cabs, but the big issue that we have that we always have to play with this is when we're miking drums. Mm-hmm. When you have, let's say you have a bottom and a top snare mic, they will more often than not be out of phase with each other. So you'd have to flip the polarity switch on one of those mics. You'd have to think about things like how the kick and the snare are getting picked up in the overheads in all of those relationships, right? So,
which is why miking up drum sets is very mathematical to an extent.
It can, to an extent, but you have to play around with that. But the first step, I think, is just being aware that this is something that you're going to have to contend with, and you want to pay attention to that. Now, today, we have the benefit of we can see this in our DAWs, right? We go, oh, look at that. The sound waves, they're off, and that's what it is.
Yes.
I think it's important to remember that before the advent of the DAW, they didn't have that. It was all by ear, and you'd have to use that polarity switch or the phase flip switch and see, okay, is that better? No? Okay, well, then we'll leave it off, right? And go about that. So
is that better? No, flipping the switch doesn't work. All right, move the fucking mic.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but that's where, we like to wave the flag of like, well, capture it well at the source, right? And leaves you less stuff to do. But
can we wave that flag really big and wild and loud? Capture it great at the source, because trying to fix it in the mix
as
sucks.
best as you can in your leave as little for your mix engineer to fix, and it will help your mix prep and all that kind of stuff.
Correct. So I've been like bubbling over your closing room mic thing, so why don't you continue on with that?
No, it's
brain fart.
It's essentially when you have. Now this goes down to a little bit of aesthetics. I'll say let's go back to that guitar cabinet,
okay,
or whatever happens to be, right?
Yep.
Is the benefit that you're getting of using two different mics on that, does that outweigh the phase cancellation issues that might arise? If you are the kind of person that okay, I really want a 421 and my 57 on the guitar cab. Mm-hmm. If you're that guy, you need to worry about your phase. If you're not really sure I'm not sure if I need both of these, well, then maybe you just want to do one mic on your guitar cabinet and not worry about it as much. But those are other choices that you do if you're not comfortable or don't want to worry about phase and this kind of stuff. You just want to keep it simple, minimize the amount of microphones that you're using, and you'll probably be better off for it.
Or a happier camper anyway.
Yeah. Something like that, right?
A lot of things like that.
Yeah, I think so. But that sounds like a lot of, I don't know, kind of like babbling, but hopefully that makes some kind of sense. But it's
well, phase is kind of like a hocus pocus kind of thing. And when you are not aware of it and how to deal with it, it makes things like, and you're trying like every plugin known to man to like get if the phase is really pulling your low end out and you're trying to like juice it back up, you're you're accentuating an issue that should have been fixed in the front end, so to speak.
Yeah,
Whether it's just making sure that the phase is aligned in the DAW or phase was aligned when you were tracking with multiple microphones. So those are all things that you should be paying attention to, listening to as you're tracking if you're using multiple mics. And then obviously you want to think about this stuff as you're doing your mix, especially when you get, as you said, competing things in a mix. And more often than not, it's very, very noticeable in a low end of a particular instrument's sound. So that's where most people are going to notice phase, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. It's when you're, let's go back to the guitar cab. If you're playing and you go, where the hell did all the low end go? Why does my guitar sound like this hollow kind of shell of the tone I heard in the room? Well,
because I turned the EQ knob down on the bass. No, I'm just kidding.
Right. Yeah, the same thing for most notably kick drums, right? And we know, kick drums, not just today, but certainly like any modern music production,
EDM
kick is key, right?
Gigantic.
You need to have a big kick. Yeah, seems like regardless of what kind of style you're doing, you want a good solid foundation. So we want to make sure that we have those kind of issues sorted.
Yes. What else would be probably a good thing to kind of describe before we move on to the next portion of whatever you're about to say?
Sure.
And that is how this comes about in sounding like you have less bass or things are a bit more hollow, and why they're canceling themselves out. Because we kind of discussed the concept from the curve of a sine wave as an example. But what actually happens is it's causing your speakers to compete in the direction that it's pushing and pulling itself. Because in order to make the sound waves, the speaker is moving out and in the cone is moving out and in on like a rod that is magnetic and has electrical impulses. So when you send two impulses to the speaker that are competing in the directions that they're supposed to move, the one that wins is the one that has slightly more energy and volume over the one that has slightly less energy and volume. Now, even though it has slightly more energy and volume in, say, if it's pushing out, it may not have the amount of oomph that you were originally hearing in the studio room or whatever you were originally recording, because now things are out of phase. It's because it's had that much more volume, but it doesn't have the same impact on the volume and the push because it's had a bunch of it subtracted. So the speaker is essentially fighting itself to play two sounds at once, and it can't do that if they're not moving in the same direction.
Yeah.
And that's where we get the weirdness out of the speakers, is because the speaker is competing against itself based on the sound waves it's being fed.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
That's probably a little bit beyond the nerdy that it needed to be.
Well, but that's the result of it, right?
Yes.
And it's one thing to, look at all these things that we're used to these days of looking at waveforms in our DAW and all this kind of stuff. We tend to be more visual than, we should use our ears more than our eyes in a lot of cases. So.
Right? I think so.
Yeah.
All right. So
absolutely.
With that being said, we're going to take a moment for you to listen to a few words from our sponsors. All right. What are you going to move on to next, Chris?
Well, we've talked about during the tracking stage of flipping polarity switches if we have them on our preamps, moving mics to kind of minimize this. But now let's say that you have it as best as you can, or worst case scenario, you didn't pay attention to this.
Right.
And now it's recorded and it's in your DAW.
Oh, no, Mr. Bill.
I know. What do we do?
What do we do? Huh.
Well, the first thing, obviously, we can look at is just zooming in really close in our DAWs and taking a look at the waveform. And just like you said there, we're visualizing the sound wave, but when we see the recorded sound, it will either go up initially on the initial attack or it will move down.
Yes.
Whatever that is doing on, let's use a kick here. Let's make it even easier. We say that we just have one mic on the kick and one mic on the snare. We'll make it really easy. Now, you will see the snare attack on the kick channel and vice versa, right? They will pick up both of those signals. So you want to make sure that they are in phase with each other as well. So if you're looking at both tracks, if the sound waves aren't moving initially in the same direction, they will be out of phase.
Yes.
So you can try then to just flip one of them out of phase, and more than likely, that will fix the issue for you, or at least make it better. So there are things that we can do when we just do that. We can also do things, and I know this is something that you're prone to do, and I'm prone to doing as well, because we're anal retentive individuals like that, and we're nerdy. But that is the comparatively to the overheads of the drums. If we listen to the kick in relation to the overheads, there will be a small, but it will be present delay when the bass gets picked up by the overhead mics.
Yes.
That can be very small, and generally be very small because your overheads are not going to be far enough away to actually cause it to be a long delay. But what we can do is to make sure that we have a relationship between the overheads and the kick in phase as well. But what you and I like to do also is to measure how much that delay is between the kick reaching the overheads, and I will actually either nudge the track or use a sample delay to
push it back,
move it so that it hits at the same time in those. Now, we're talking very little here. We might be talking about
a few hundred samples.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a lot, it's a little bit, but I like to do that just because I like to be in control of those things to the best of my ability.
Oh, you're a control freak, you anal retentive man.
Guilty as charged. Yes. But so those are things that we can do visually. You can nudge the track and just bring it into, so that the timeline is taken care of. And you might have to flip this phase as well. But those are small adjustments that we can do visually in our DAW. You can use the sample delay if you have one in your DAW. Logic has one. And while we're on the subject here, I want to make sure that when you do all of these adjustments, you have to do that before. You don't have to, but you'll thank me later. But do all of these before you start editing your drums and performances, anything that you do, because you want to make sure that you do that, and the changes that you made are going to be
consistent
for the entirety of the track.
Yes.
Yeah. You don't want to do this 500 times for each track. Trust me, you're going to kill yourself.
Oh, come on.
Well, if you're a masochist, yeah, go ahead and do it. Yeah,
that's right.
Do it for every edit that you want to do. But so there are ways that we can do that in our DAW, and just nudging the audio using sample delay. That's up to you. But you can also flip the phase on a lot of plugins today as well. But I know on Logic you have the gain plugin where it actually has a
phase switch
on as well.
Yeah. And if you're in stereo, you can phase flip one side or the other side. You don't have to phase the whole thing. Flip, switch.
Right. But that's also helpful if you have a stereo source that you need to flip on. You can do that right there as well. So that's how I go about doing it by hand. I like doing it by hand, again, because I'm a control freak, but I'm probably making that harder on myself because there are some specialized plugins that deals with this kind of stuff. So maybe you can tell us about those.
Oh, you want me to start rattling off plugins?
Yeah.
No, okay. All right.
So I can.
No, specialized plugins. My favorite and my go-to is the Eventide Precision Time Align. And the reason why I like the Eventide Precision Time Align because unlike any other, it goes to a 64th of a sample. Now, how they do this
you
is,
mentioned that before.
it's
I
fucking
don't know
nuts.
how they do that.
Well,
I don't know how that works.
it has a lot to do with how plug-in delay compensation works, and then they obviously do their mathematical whatever. But they have 2 sliders on this thing, and then they have quite a few different pieces of information that come back at you on this plugin. But the big slider essentially is what they call coarse movement, which is 1 sample at a time. Then they have a fine slider, which is the 64ths of a sample. So it becomes like this. You've got 100 samples dot, I don't know, 56 or something, and that's like a 56th of a 64th of a sample over from between 156 and 157. It's crazy. Not that anybody needs to be that ridiculously anal, but you can get there with the Eventide Precision Time-Align plugin, which is
for the truly anal retentive engineer in your life.
That is correct. So I am one of those. That is my go-to plugin. Another one that is fairly popular is the Waves in Phase plugin. And that one actually has some automated functions to it, which is pretty nifty. Beyond that, they have the Vox and Go Pha. I'm going to pronounce that Pha, even though it's PHA 979. We have the Sound Radix Auto Align, which so Waves isn't the only one that's doing it, but Sound Radix also has an auto aligner as well to align the phase. And then you have the UA Little Labs in between phase as well. So
yeah. So there are a lot of tools, and I just know that I haven't used it yet, but the Voxengo, the PHA 979, I'm assuming that stands for Phase Align. Yeah, but that is actually a free option. So check it out. But yeah, so there are things that can help with this. I know that I don't own it. I haven't used it, but the Waves in Phase has, a lot of deep functionality in there as well. And it has,
I believe it has a method to where you can add multiple tracks and it will phase align, say, a drum kit for you.
That's more than I thought it did, but I know that it can at least do 2 sources where you can check. So if you have, an inside or an outside kick, for example, it can help you by lining
phase
those
align
up.
Those,
so, yeah. So there are, but it can be good to be able to do this sort of visually and just by manually in your DAW as well, because if you're finding yourself that you're doing this as your primary gig, it's like you're phase aligning drums, you probably want to get a little help, or you're going to get carpal tunnel within a week. But it can be done. Obviously, it just takes a little bit more time and just a little bit more of effort, as opposed to do it just manually. Yes. But phase is one of those things that you'll know when you hear it. And I think what we should probably do for our Tuesday tip here next week is probably just show a couple of examples of how we can do that and how, let's say, do something with some drum tracks or something. But we'll figure out the tracks. But I think that would be a good thing to do, because it can be tricky to talk about this
without examples.
What does it sound?
Yeah, what does it sound like?
It sounded like.
Well, that's why I was trying to squeeze my nose to kind of give a reference to that. So it's like I've lost all the bass in my voice. So yeah,
in phase, out of phase, in phase. So
unsquoze nose, squoze nose. Yeah. So
yeah, right. So let's do that.
All right, sounds like a plan.
But anything else you'd like to add to that, Jody?
Well, as I interjected earlier, I was going to say that you also have to be aware of when phasing is going to occur between instruments in your mix after you've already recorded these things. So if you're not worried about the phase because you did such an unbelievable job as the recording engineer when you were actually tracking things, and you're now pawning it off or flopping it off on a mix engineer, and maybe somebody else has recorded things pristinely and they're flopping it off on you as the mix engineer, and you're suddenly like, wait a minute, God, when I've got this stuff soloed, shit sounds awesome. And then all of a sudden you're like, you add in the bass and the kick suddenly goes, where the hell did the kick go? It's like gone, even though now it sounds like really deep on my voice. So when the kick is disappearing, or when you have a kick that's really huge and your bass suddenly loses its punch when the kick is going, you want to dive in there and find out, well, is the kick got one particular thing where maybe it's going positive in its direction when it's being hit, and the bass is actually going negative when it's getting hit. That's an introduction of that point of where they're crossing lines and fighting each other, and suddenly your bass is gone, or something about the kick and the bass is gone. Same thing can happen with guitars. If you've got multiple guitars going on and suddenly you've combined them and they sound like really weird, like not sounding good, kind of weird, or maybe your low end's gone, or maybe your attack has suddenly disappeared, or something has happened. There's a good chance that it's a issue with the phasing between the sounds that you've recorded. So, and the same can be true for using things with vocals. Like if you're tracking vocals and you've got the same singer singing things over and over and over again, and sometimes they're going to cross that phase because either they're not standing at the same distance at the mic, or they've moved slightly from the mic. So you have to be aware of these things if it's creating something that is a drag to the sound.
Yeah. Absolutely. And sometimes it can be used, like, interesting you mentioned vocals there, because if we think about, multi-tracking vocals, maybe it's a backing vocal type of situation.
Yeah.
Where you're trying to do that stacking. That
Queen
might be,
style. Phil, what's his name? Wall of sound stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Spectre.
But yeah, Phil Spector, or a Mutt Lange type of a vibe, right?
Yes.
If you think of any of those kind of massive vocal productions, but then it becomes perhaps a part of a sound as an effect as well. Like,
yep.
But if you're struggling, if you want to make something bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, then that's one thing. You think, well, it's not adding up. It's sort of subtracting with every vocal that I add on to this. Then you're probably looking at some phasing issues. So,
yes.
Yeah, be aware of your phase, man.
Get in phase, baby.
Yeah, because you're not going to like the result of phase cancellation.
You might,
unless
most other people might not.
But yeah, and then you realize that this is part of how synthesis works when you apply multiple waves. But that's a whole other podcast.
Let's not even start another episode.
Let's not get into that.
Let's start tying a bow on it. So I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to say Friday Finds. And we usually always kick this off with you. And I seem to remember at the top, just as we were hitting the record button, you said something to the effect of, I don't know what the fuck I'm going to do. So what are you going to do for your Friday Find?
Oh, I'm so on the spot. No, I am going to pick. I was very fortunate a while back, actually just within the last couple of weeks here, to get some of the native SSL plugins. And one of them that I am really excited to check out and get my hands dirty with is the drum strip. Mm-hmm. From SSL. And this is all from their native bundles. I've been on a real SSL kick lately, haven't I?
Sure seems like it. Man, it's like several weeks in a row now or something.
It feels like it. I've done a lot of talking about SSL. But no, it's sort of like it sounds like it's a drum strip. It has, compression, it has gating, it has, some basic EQ and things going on there. It has a transient shaper. And it's one of those tools that I'm just looking forward to see how I can get it into my workflow and how it can hopefully enhance that. So my pick this week is Drum Strip by SSL.
Well, good on you.
Yay, and good on SSL, because I obviously do like their stuff. So
yes.
What about you? What do you got for us?
Well, I took a trip down virtual NAMM lane earlier this week.
Ooh.
Yeah. NAMM is normally this week. So normally I wouldn't be skiing this week anyway. I'd be down in California in Anaheim. schmoozing.
You'd be
and
walking
doing all-
around going, God damn, there's a lot of people here and it's noisy everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but this week they've got NAMM going on and it has been virtual. So you get to sort of get an idea of some of the new things that people are doing. And one of the new things that I checked out was a presentation that would be highly designed, I think, for people that do EDM. And EDM has got its own set of production values that kind of go on, but there is a DAW that I think is probably geared really well for that. That's probably the best way to say it. And I'm not going to say Ableton Live, and I'm sure Ableton Live is a very, very capable DAW for EDM type stuff. Same thing, Logic's new functionality with the clips thing is geared towards that, I think, as well. But I think Logic and Apple stole this from the company I'm about to mention, which is Bitwig. Bitwig has a DAW that seems very, very EDM centric for production. At least that's the impression that I got in watching the presentation of their updated version of their DAW. So I'm going with Bitwig's DAW. Now, obviously, you don't have to be an EDM dude to do this, but the examples that they were showing with the way they were doing it, you're going to get into EDM, Bitwig's the DAW to use, man. That's how I look at it.
Yeah. What version are they at right now?
I didn't catch the version number.
Yeah. Well, listeners, you have to do a quick Google search if you're not a
Well,
Bitwig
I think it's just
user,
bitwig.com. You just go there and you can find out. But
yeah.
the stuff that
But I
their guy
remember
was doing was insane. It was really cool. I was just like, well, maybe I want to get into all this EDM stuff now too, for creation, not so much for the mixing.
Because as we all know, all it takes is a good DAW, right?
Right. All it takes is the DAW, man.
No, but you told me when you had watched that you said, I think Apple got this from Bitwig.
There's no doubt.
I remember seeing it the first time. I was like, wow, that when Bitwig came out with version 1, whatever it was.
Right.
I was like, wow, that's really interesting. That just it was sort of taking the clip concept of Ableton Live that was doing that first, I think. And now it was in the timeline. It was all together, and it was
Well, and the interesting thing about Ableton's Live, and I don't know if you remember this, but when we were doing a lot of live shows together, we were using Ableton Live as our backing track.
I sure remember
player. Yep. And you weren't really as privy, I think, as I was in putting the backing tracks together, because I did it with Donnie, the drummer that we were playing with at the time. And Donnie had an endorsement deal with Ableton. And knowing that the material that we were doing was not all 4/4.
Yeah.
Some of it had some very funky time signatures, and it was really cool stuff. But to get it to tweak into Ableton and work the way that we were able to make it work, which is probably the most complicated setup of any backing track situation, because we were capable of actually on the fly changing the arrangement.
Yeah.
Nobody else at the time was doing that. And
Donnie, you should probably mention that at this point, we're going back almost 20 years. Right?
Maybe not quite that far, but it was pretty
close
far.
to.
Close to.
Yeah.
So, Ableton was like, I don't know, version 2 or 3 at this point. So it was pretty fresh and new. And they hadn't considered using it the way we were using it. And Donnie went back to them with notes saying, hey, we're trying to do this because this is what we want to pull off. And Ableton came back and said, okay. And they added those features into the application in subsequent upgrades. So the way Ableton Live works now is actually partially responsible to us, which is kind of cool. Nobody else, obviously the only people that are ever going to know this in the grand scheme of history are you and I and Donnie and maybe Jesse and then of course the people that are listening to this podcast at this point. So,
and it's probably even a shorter list of people that actually care.
Yeah, then nobody really gives a shit at this point. So who gives a shit? But,
so what you're saying, all talking about live, your choice is Bitwig.
Yeah.
to round up the Friday.
No, the
Friday,
Bitwig thing was more on the whole EDM thing, because I just thought the way the guy was using it and what he was doing with it was actually very, very form functional, and it was all built into the DAW, which was actually pretty cool. More built in than, say, what Logic is doing with its clips and whatnot. So I just thought that was cool. I thought it was cool. So now, while we've still got your attention, we would love to have you go to our website at insidetherecordingstudio.com/review and leave us a review. Now, mind you, it's for Apple's podcasts. And the unfortunate thing about that is we don't really have the review sections of anywhere else, because I don't think you can leave reviews on podcasts on Spotify or on Google Play or on Amazon, at least not yet. But on Apple, you can. And it does actually help us quite a bit if you go there and say, hey, these guys are pretty damn cool, regardless of whether or not you listen to it on Apple Podcasts. In addition to that, please go to InsideTheRecordingStudio.com and you can sign up for our email list. You will get some lovely presets by myself and by Chris for Universal Audio plugins and for Stephen Slate plugins. Slate, yes, Slate. In addition to that, you'll get some emails about Chris and I, our upcoming in the industry kind of thing, little anecdotal stories and whatnot. And plus you'll get weekly reminders of what just happened in the past week on Inside the Recording Studio. And we'll make sure you don't miss any future episodes. Plus, if you are inclined, you can email us at goldstar, GOLDSTAR, at InsideTheRecordingStudio.com with the word phase. You might get something cool in return. In addition to that, if you have a topic of suggestion that you would like Chris and I to pontificate on, to espouse upon, to blow your brains wide open out of your head with, you can you can go to our contact page on InsideTheRecordingStudio.com and give us that suggestion, and we will put it into rotation, provided it actually has something to do with music and recording and mixing and mastering and tracking and all that kind of stuff. Because if you tell us you want us to talk about the quantum mechanics of a quasar, we're probably just going to look at you blankly and go, what? So with that, I'm going to say sayonara.
Have a good day, Jody.
You too.
Thanks for listening, everybody.